Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and innovators, it is my honor to welcome you to the CWRU Innovation Summit and introduce Dr. Ellen Williams, Director of the Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA-e, in the Department of Energy. The Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA-e, advances high-potential, high-impact technologies that are too early for private sector investment. Prior to her Senate confirmation for her role in ARPA-e, Dr. Williams served as the Senior Advisor to the Secretary on the DOE's technology transfer policies, issues, and plans. She recommended and helped establish the department's new Office of Technology Transitions to expand the impact of the department's extensive research and development activities. Dr. Williams joined DOE from BP, where she had been the Chief Scientist since January 2010. There, she was responsible for the assurance of technology programs and strategic research and program development. Her priority actions involved developing a multi-university research program on natural resource constraints in the context of energy, the Energy Sustainability Challenge, and establishing the cores of scientific excellence and innovation in key disciplinary areas which were essential to BP's long-term technical competitiveness. Prior to joining BP, Dr. Williams worked for over 30 years in academia, obtaining her PhD at Caltech in 1981, then moving to the University of Maryland, where she rose to become a distinguished university professor in the Department of Physics, and in the Institute of Physical Science, excuse me. She founded the University of Maryland Material Science Research and Engineering Center and served as its director for 15 years. In parallel, Dr. Williams worked extensively in providing technical advice to the US government, primarily through the Departments of Energy and Defense. Dr. Williams is a member of the National Academy of Sciences, a fellow of the American Physical Society, the American Vacuum Society, American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and has been recognized by awards from the American Physical Society, Materials Research Society, and she has a distinguished history of professional service, including chairing the development of the NAS report on technical issues for the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. Please join me in welcoming Director Ellen Williams to the CWRU Innovation Summit.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and I'm really delighted to be here today to talk to you about ARPA-e. Now I need to see, okay, so we've got some screens there. So the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy, as you've just heard, is all about innovation, and it's about technology, because in order to have innovation and changes in the future, we need to have a technical basis for the entrepreneurs and the innovators to work with, and that's our job in ARPA-e. Okay, so ARPA-e is all about energy. Many people think of the energy space as something fixed and immutable, but the energy space, just like every other aspect of our lives, is an area of constant change. And this shows a change in the energy space in the United States over the last 150 years. And you can see that changes have been huge. 150 years ago, we got almost all our energy from burning wood and other types of biomass. As time went on, we started burning coal, we started using oil, we started using natural gas. And you can see moving into the last half of the last century that we would see lots of oscillations in the choices between those different fossil fuels. Sometimes coal would be high, sometimes oil would be high. Sometimes natural gas would be high, as it is now, and coal would be low. And then moving into the last part of the last century and the beginning of this century, we see a new set of changes starting to happen, which is a growth of the addition of renewable or low carbon energies to our energy mix. And that's incredibly important, because as we've moved to a fossil future-based world, it has had an unintended consequence. While fossil fuels have made tremendous changes in our quality of life and our ability to develop new technologies and have the things that we want, they've also had the unintended consequence of releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is a greenhouse gas, and it's changing our atmosphere in ways that we can't easily predict. So before the Industrial Revolution, the carbon concentration in the atmosphere was about 290 parts per million. In the past year, we've surpassed 400 parts per million, and we know that we need to keep that concentration below 450 parts per million to avoid really significant changes that might completely disrupt the future of humanity. So now we have a very big motivation for change, other than the fact that as human beings, we like change and we have change all the time. And ARPA-e exists in that context of understanding the changes and helping to innovate and make possible the changes that we need in our energy for the future. So ARPA-e was established Oops, I keep going the wrong way. There we go. ARPA-e was established about 6 years ago in an act of Congress. This is the exact language from our authorizing language. You can see that we're specifically tasked to work on energy areas of reducing U.S. dependence on energy imports, reducing energy emissions, including greenhouse gases, and improving energy efficiency across all the sectors of the U.S. economy. That's a big energy space to work in. You heard earlier that we're supposed to be working on innovative, cutting-edge technologies. We're supposed to be looking at the types of innovations in early-stage research and high-risk research that industry by itself cannot and will not undertake. And we're supposed to be doing this in the context of making change feasible and approachable so that we have economic and energy security as we change the future. So let me tell you a little bit about how ARPA-e works. Because we're constantly looking for new innovation and because we're constantly trying to cover the entire spread of energy technologies and across the energy sector, we work on a constantly dynamic, changing portfolio. And this chart illustrates the different areas that we've invested in since ARPA-e began. Each of those circles represents a focused program of technology development that lasts for about 3 to 5 years. Once we've explored it, developed it, and moved the technologies forward to the point where the commercial sector can evaluate them for follow-on investment, we end it and we move on to something else. And so you can see changing through time, and over the energy space on the vertical axis, we have emphases on the transportation sector, which includes different types of fuels, it includes natural gas vehicles, it includes vehicle efficiency, and most recently it includes understanding how the kind of Internet of Things of transportation might work to improve energy efficiency. We do a lot of work on direct energy efficiency, both in the industrial sector and in buildings. We're working on energy storage, both for electric vehicles and for the grid, and we have an increasing focus on integration and effectiveness of the electric power grid and distributed generation, and finally a focus on power generation with low carbon outputs. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about those different aspects of our portfolio in a minute, but I want to be very clear about the context of how we work. Lots of people can do research and explore exciting new areas. We look to those people who do their basic research and we ask them to bring us their wonderful ideas, and we're going to take their ideas, and we're going to ask the question, if we can make your idea work, will it matter? Because a beautiful idea is a beautiful thing, but what we really want to do is to take beautiful ideas, great technologies, advance them, and make them matter in the economic sector, make them have an impact on all of our lives. So let me tell you about some of our programs. So we're going to look at this portfolio again. Look around the middle there. There's a little yellowish circle labeled metals. This is an energy efficiency, industrial efficiency program. What's it about? It's called Advanced Processing and Recycling of Lightweight Metals. That sounds kind of dull. What it's really about, why it's important, is that we know in the transportation sector, both airplanes and land vehicles, that we can save a tremendous amount of energy by lightweighting, by changing the vehicles that we use to include more lightweight metals like magnesium, aluminum, and titanium. We could save tens of quadrillions of BTUs of energy every year with that lightweighting. And that's a great thing. However, there's a problem. And the problem is that processing the titanium, the magnesium, and aluminum is costly, so people are more hesitant to make these changes, and it takes a lot of energy. So we can lose 10 to 80% of the energy benefits that we get by lightweighting by all the energy that we have to spend processing those metals. So what can we do about that? What we can do about that is take advantage of new innovations in technology and develop new ways to create those metals out of their ores that cost less money and less energy. So let me just give you one example. I'm going to talk about titanium production. What's old in titanium production is very old. There's something called the Kroll process. It's been used for over 100 years to produce titanium from titanium ore, titanium dioxide. That little diagram there, which you don't need to try to understand in too much detail, shows the Kroll process. Just look at where the indications of the temperatures are. 1,000 degrees C. This process has to take place at very high temperatures. And it also involves sacrificial magnesium. So if you look then at the little bar at the bottom there, that shows the breakdown of costs in the Kroll process. The Kroll process is really expensive, but it's been being used for over 100 years, and it's not because people haven't tried to think about more effective ways to do it. So what's new? Okay, so what's new is, and this is some work going on here at Carnegie Mellon, is new ideas about running that electrochemical process in which you separate the two parts of the reaction. We start out with creating titanium chloride in solution. We then need to separate the titanium and the chlorine. Here we're going to do it in two parts. One where the chlorine is separated at one side, one where the titanium is separated at the other side, with a barrier in between. But just a single solid barrier has proved to be a problem. So the approach here at Carnegie, at Case Western is, the approach here at Case Western is to put in place a series of barriers, divide up the barriers and conquer the problem, with the result that you have a much simpler process. And look at the cost there, 35 kilowatt hours per kilogram, a third of the energy cost of what you had before, and probably about a quarter of the economic cost. So this is a huge transformation that's going to make possible changes in the way we use energy and make it less expensive for all of us. Okay, next thing I'd like to talk about energy production. So look up at the top there, there's a light blue circle towards the right called focus. This is one of our solar energy production issues. So it's called full spectrum optical conversion and utilization of sunlight, another dull sounding acronym, but it really makes a lot of sense because what's important is that we'd like to use solar energy, but solar energy is only available for part of the daytime, and we need our electricity all the time. So what we'd like to be able to do is figure out some way to store the energy from the sun and use it all through the day. One approach to that problem has been to take the energy of the sun and concentrate it to form heat. And then you can store the heat in very hot objects and retrieve it to generate electricity all through the day and night. Unfortunately, that's proven very difficult to make competitive economically. It just hasn't cut it in terms of comparison with other sources of producing electricity. So, what's new? So what's new in this program is we're going to look at the sunlight. We know it comes in all different colors. The red colors are the heat. The blue, yellow, and green colors are the energies that can be used to run photovoltaics and create electricity. So we're going to try to do something different, not just use the heat from solar energy, but combine the heat with the electricity from photovoltaics into one system so that we get both electricity and storage out of the same system. So that's our focus program, and we have a bunch of teams working on that. We call it Make Every Photon Count. And this is just a little illustration of how you might go about doing that. We have the incoming sunlight, all its different colors. We put it onto a surface. Now, because of advances in microfabrication techniques, we can tailor that surface so that it reflects the red colors. It lets the blue and green colors through to the photovoltaics. You create your electricity. You send the red colors over to a liquid that absorbs the heat and carries it away, and you've got both your storage and your electricity. Another way we're making every photon count is by improving the way that we point the solar panels to follow the sun. And what's old in pointing is gears and rigorous heavy equipment that has to be machined to high tolerances. And what we're looking at now is a new and innovative approach that's based on pneumatics, using flexible plastic bellows that can be driven out of a pneumatic driver so that an entire field of solar panels can be driven off of one controller and all tilt and point in perfect synchrony and drive down the costs of the pointing by about a factor of 3, and again, make this power generation more effective and more commercially viable for all of us. Okay, I'm going to tell you about one more, our Delta program. That's kind of to the lower right there. It's a little red and blue icon. This is a building efficiency program. Okay, so Delta stands for Develop Localized Thermal Management Systems. That doesn't spell Delta. Must actually be something else, okay? But what it's about is the huge amount of electricity and energy of all forms that we use in running our buildings, both our residences and our commercial buildings. And that little chart is a breakdown of where all the energy goes in our buildings. And you can see on the upper part of it that heating, cooling, and ventilation is a big section of the energy that we use in our buildings. It amounts to about 14 quadrillion British thermal units every year. Any improvement we can make in building efficiency is going to be a big improvement and a reduction in the amount of energy that we have to use. So what's the problem? What's old is, in terms of personal comfort, is that the very small, well, actually there's quite a few of us in this room, but we're heating the entire space, even right up to the ceiling. And there's all other parts of this building that aren't occupied at all, but we're heating the whole building. And this has been the kind of paradigm in building heating. What we'd like to be able to do in the Delta program is to change that paradigm and think about ways to manage the personal comfort of individuals in the building and not have to heat and cool the whole building to the same level. So how can we go about doing that? Again, we have a whole bunch of teams with an amazing array of creative problems thinking about how can we do personal comfort as opposed to heating and cooling the entire building. So here's some of the great ideas they have. Ventilation comes to you. I love this one. Okay, this is what I want. I want a little personal robot following me around and covering me with warm air or cool air as I need it to tailor to my personal comfort and perfection. And if I had that robot, I certainly would give it a name. Okay, a little less sexy is the idea that there would be pointing ventilators in every room. They detect when you walk into the room, and then they would adjust an airflow perfectly over you to assure your personal comfort. And then on the other side of things, there's a whole bunch that can be done in terms of textile design. And here's a little illustration which is based on two concepts. One is the concept sort of related to night vision goggles. You know that at night, if I put on a pair of night vision goggles, I can see you even in the perfect dark because you're emitting heat, infrared radiation. What we'd like to be able to do is design our clothes so that they keep that heat in when it's cold outside and let that heat out when it's warm outside. This type of design is possible. In this case, a team is thinking about developing a structure that they've seen in shark skins where they have a tailored structure that uses the optical properties of the infrared radiation and changes that depending on the temperature and your personal comfort to either keep the heat in or let the heat out. Okay, so that's a quick review of some of our programs. We've got a whole bunch of others, as you saw in my chart. And if you let me, I'd talk about them for about 4 more hours, but I've been told I probably shouldn't do that. So I'm just going to finish up with one other concept, which is that in addition to the programs that we run, we also try to reach out to entrepreneurial organizations and groups and understand and help with what they're doing. One of the groups that we've worked with is a company called Local Motors. And their concept is the concept of the personally constructed vehicle. They want you to be able to walk into a showroom, sit down with the salesman, write out the specs for the vehicle you want, and have it 3D printed for you as you wait, and then you drive your vehicle out the door that day. So we worked with Local Motors last year. We ran a challenge design about how to create a really energy efficient vehicle. And so we sent this challenge design out to the community of automotive engineers and designers to come up with a 3D printable car that completely changed the paradigm of how we design cars. The winning design came from Indiana University, and their idea was both aerodynamic, so they designed a car that was kind of shaped like a water droplet, where the pointy end is, the water droplet shape is in the vertical part of the car, and then the internal part of the car was a skeletal type structure fabricated out of semi-porous materials that could be 3D printed and give you the design, the integrity and strength of a vehicle without the weight that's necessary with typical construction materials. So LITECAR is now working on seeing if they can integrate this type of design technology into their 3D printed cars. So what I've tried to do here, and I hope I've given you a flavor of the fact that there is a huge amount of innovation going on, that there's a huge amount of technical opportunity that makes it possible for us to innovate and make big changes in the energy space. And so to finish up, I'd also like to mention that every year ARPA-e holds a big technology conference called our Summit. It's at the end of February in Washington, D.C. area. All of our performers come in a huge technology showcase and put their new technologies on display for people to see and talk about. So I'm hoping I can see all of you at the Technology Summit, and I'd like once again to thank you for this opportunity to be here today. Okay.
Wonderful. So we have time for questions?
Okay.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Williams. The question that I have has to do with how do we formally support informal learning? A lot of the things that you're talking about, come from, and I think Pink Box generally is this sort of this idea, of having a space where people go when you don't know what the ideas they're going to come up with are, right? You can't dictate that. But to repeat the question, how do we formally support informal learning?
I think the concept of ThinkBox is a great example. I just recently attended a maker fair, another great example of people using their individual initiative and informal learning. I think that the last example I gave you, the technology challenge, is actually a very, very good way to engage people with informal learning, and we're looking about ways to do that more and more. At universities, most engineering programs have senior design challenges. It's not really informal learning, but it gives people the experience of that sort of informal hands-on learning, and that's a great way to get people engaged in entrepreneurship.
Can you hear me? Has DOE evaluated the potential that heavier vehicles can get better mileage than light vehicles because of MV equals MV? It's like throwing a lead-filled ping pong ball into the wind instead of a hollow ping pong ball. So with regen braking, you can make up the difference. That's one question. The other question is, there is a process that uses liquid propane instead of water for hydraulic fracturing for natural gas and oil. And would DOE please consider subsidizing that process so that they can beat out API and the people who are resenting it?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so two questions. One about regenerative braking, which is clearly an area that DOE has put a lot of time and effort into. We've got a heavy, not in ARPA-e, but in our Vehicles Technology Office, we've got a heavy truck initiative that pays a lot of attention to those issues. And so the things that you've talked about are definitely part of the consideration. In terms of the propane for fracking, DOE is thinking about and requesting permission from Congress right now to set up a specific program that has to do with water energy issues and issues of water use in fracking, which would relate to what you've just mentioned, would definitely be on that agenda.
My question is the intersection of technology, especially this interesting, fascinating stuff, and policy.
Yes.
I live right outside Washington, D.C., and see some interesting things go on. The question, though, is that to what extent are you outreaching to the political and policy setting structure so they understand the importance of this stuff? This is just anecdotal, of course, but there was a former vice president candidate who suggested closing Department of Energy to get better control over extracting minerals and oil from federal land, despite the fact that happens to be Department of Interior's job. I'm just so, more broadly, is the message getting out?
Yeah. So we're working on messaging all the time, and we actually rely on people like you to help us with getting that message out, that there's tremendous opportunities in technology and innovation, and it's tremendously important to continue to drive those forward. The policy space, one of the things I think that is really important and useful for us to do is, again, to make policymakers aware of the options that are out there. Because if policy gets made on the basis of yesterday's knowledge about technology, you might wind up with more restrictive policies than are necessary. If policymakers know that it's possible to make these changes in ways that's economically attractive, they will be more willing to work that into their policies. So again, having educated and informed people like this audience, understanding these things and communicating them widely is really important for the country.
So you showed us a couple technologies that were bio-inspired, like the squid skin and the rib cage. My question is biomimicry becoming kind of like a common practice at DOE and ARPA? Is it getting implemented?
Yeah. Well, biomimicry shows up all the time. It's, of course, not a solution to every type of problem that we want to do, but certainly it's a great inspiration, especially in the materials science area. I guess you could also think about some of the work that's going on in kind of systems and controls and big data as really starting to think about the way things work as almost being like a living organism.
ARPA-e is a projects agency.
Yes.
So you have a little bit of a different focus than the Office of Science or NSF or even NIH that take more responsibility for the academic research infrastructure in
Yes.
the nation. From your perspective as a projects agency, what should universities be doing either in their research or their education mission to accelerate innovation?
Yeah. So we see the basic research that gets funded by the Office of Science or the National Science Foundation as the input product to what ARPA-e does. So that basic research infrastructure is hugely important. What we do need to pay attention to, in addition to keeping that basic infrastructure strong, is to pay more attention to the interface. And that is to encourage those people who take a look at their basic research outputs and say, I think I can do something with that, make it easy for them to take that step, try to develop their technology, and see if they can make it real. But in many cases, it's important that they know that there's also a path for them to go back if they want to the basic research. And so that kind of culture that you can be a basic researcher, you can step out and plunge into the real world and make a difference, but then be welcomed back is a cultural aspect that needs to be developed both in universities and in our federal laboratories.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Mike. I wanted to know, do you have any reflections about breakthroughs and strides in the use of thorium in terms for energy use in the near future, thorium?
So thorium for nuclear reactors?
Yes.
Yeah, certainly that's an area that is under discussion. ARPA-e hasn't focused on nuclear energy yet. We haven't seen a project that's in our space. And so I'm not up to speed on the thorium issues, but I know that it has been one that's part of the discussions in DOE's nuclear energy program.
All right, one more question.
Okay.
Are you following the fusion reaction research going on at UC Berkeley, and how is that progressing, and is that going to, how far are we from fusion power?
Okay. We're certainly following the fusion energy research activities. We actually do have a small program in fusion. We took a look at the entire fusion space and decided that there was a potential opportunity in an area that was underexplored. And so we're putting some investment into seeing if that can be pushed forward and if it indeed does provide a new path. I would say that even if we're successful in this program, we're still looking to a long pathway to developing commercial fusion.
When are you going to put it in since they don't make DeLoreans anymore?
I think we'll have to bring the DeLoreans back.